Welcome back. Today we have a preview for a brand new game from Portal Games. In fact, this is the second edition, a brand new standalone from the Stronghold series called Stronghold Undead from Portal Games.
Yeah, this is going to take the basic concept of that Stronghold, which is a 1v1 tower defense game, and kind of makes it a fantasy zombie-esque type of game where one player, me, the Invader, is trying to come into the castle and break down these walls, while the other player is trying to defend it.
So the first thing we need to say is that this is a superiorly complex game. You will not be able to just sit across from players that are novice and have them pick up the game really, really easily.
Right.
This is for players who enjoy a brain-burning game that is highly competitive with two players that know how to play the game. That's how the most enjoyment from this game is derived. The other thing we'll notice is that this is a complete prototype. Obviously, go to the Kickstarter page to see all the final components. A lot of our things here are prototype form. The colors don't even match up properly. Just know that before you watch the rest of this video that we are playing with the prototype copy. Right. Having said that, all the functions of the game that we're about to explain are 100% intact. This game is purely asymmetrical. Each of us are representing very different factions, and we're going to play the game very differently. Knowing that, you will have to know your faction very well in order to be able to compete. As the defender, I am purely relying on the ability of my Invader to give me actions. Yes, I said that right. As the defender, you really have no native actions that you're going to be able to use. Each round, and the game is divided into 8 different rounds, you will gain some actions as the defender known as the hourglasses. And you'll be able to use these actions on your side of the castle to be able to take those actions. However, I will rely heavily on the Invader in order to give me actions, because everything that he does will generate things that he can do, but also give me these hourglasses in order to use.
Yeah, it's an interesting back and forth, and when you are playing the defender, again, the game doesn't really hold your hand at all or give you any kind of real guidance. It's almost like a sandbox here of the amount of actions that the defender can do, but you do have to keep in mind that each one of these actions is going to give a different amount of those time tokens to the other player. In addition, the Invader has to manage their mana, which is the number of cubes they're going to get that they have to spend on their abilities. I can always choose to not spend one of these mana, but if I do, I have to give the defender yet another one of those time tokens. So you can see how it can become quickly overwhelming. If you start doing a lot, that means the defender is going to get to do a whole lot as well.
So what we are going to do here today is give you a basic overview of the game. And to do so, I will talk about my side of the board first, and then we'll talk about the basic turn structure. My side of the board represents the castle, and this is what I'm trying to defend. And I'm trying to do it with as few actions as that you allow me to use, and with a very limited supply of resources. My resources are finite. Once they're gone, they're gone. So the people that you see here, plus maybe a few others that are off to the side of the board, are all the number of troops that I'll have. My troops consist of a number of different things. I have archers, which will have to be grouped up on very specific parts of the wall in order to damage your units. And these archers will be shooting into very specific areas called ramparts. As you look at the game board outside of my castle, you have the castle walls, you have some turrets, you have the ramparts, you have the foreground, which he will bring his troops in, and then you have what's considered the camp, which is off the board. Coming back to my side of the board, I'm also going to have soldiers, and then I'm also going to have some veterans. Each of these range and strength values, which I'll be using to repel his army that is constantly beating up against my walls. I'm also going to have a couple other unique units. I'll have walls, which can never be destroyed in the game, but they'll always provide me with one base strength in those areas. I have the ability to rebuild those walls or add additional walls to those areas. Plus, I'll have a very limited number of priests. These will move around from locations to be able to bolster my walls, maybe give support to my troops in those areas, and repel your phantoms and your vampires that he'll be bringing into these locations. Looking at my areas, though, I have 5 basically kind of worker placement spots on my board. Each of these individual spots has 3 or 4 actions associated to those spots. So if I look over here at the forge, I have the ability to build some footbridges, some cannons, some crosses, and some skeleton cauldrons by using my hourglasses. And this concept works throughout the board. Each of these locations will provide me with something when I fill them up to allow me to place them in locations and then wipe at the end of the round. Some of my actions will allow me to reuse those spots as soon as they're filled up. And all of these actions have very dire consequences on my ability to protect these walls from you.
Yeah, and the Invader setup is almost completely different. for the most part, the Invader is playing alongside the edge of the board in these 7 different ramparts. And you'll notice a number of cubes on each one of these foregrounds here. And these cubes are going to push their way forward as I draw more cubes out of this bag. And there are a lot of cubes. This represents the assaulting army of just undead. And I've got my skeletons, my phantoms, and my vampires that can move through as well. And you'll see here that the board setup for me is completely different as the Invader. For example, I have a number of spells that are predetermined at the start of the game. You're going to deal out 6 random spells that you can use on your turn by spending that mana. In addition, you're going to have a spell book that you can use to sub out these spells. And what these are going to do is mostly going to let me place siege engines around the outside of the board. Each one of these ramparts can either have a siege engine placed on it, like so, or you can place a terrain type, which would come in and take that spot as well. And you can only have one of the 2 of these. And however you build these out, it's going to change the way you can interact with the game and the way you can do damage. And you're going to see more of those up here and more spaces here where I can just basically play tokens and enhance my battlefield. And just like the Defender, the way you build out your battlefield determines what options you have when it comes to actually assaulting the walls.
So the dynamic that is constantly going on in this game is the give and play that the Invader provides those hourglasses to the Defender in order to use. There are times in the game when that will disperse, though. Players are going to be moving their tokens around to different locations, and that's really the key to the game. As the Invader moves to different locations, he's forcing my hand to defend in those locations while possibly sneaking other units on the other side. And as the Defender, you're constantly having to juggle limited resources and limited defenders in those particular areas. The game itself is broken into 4 different phases, over 8 different rounds. And the very first thing that happens in the game is the supplies phase. Now, each of these different rounds is going to supply inherently the Invader with an X number of mana, which he can use to cast those spells and do other very specific events. It's also going to provide the Defender with a very limited number of hourglasses natively in order to use. At the start of the game, that's 10 hourglasses for me, which is the largest influx of hourglasses I will ever have in the game. One of the unique things about this game, though, is that the Invaders are really powerful in this game at the start of the game. But if I can hold on, I get a little bit more powerful because he has to give me more hourglasses in order to take those actions. During the supply phase, that's when the Invader will decide what to use at those given times.
Yeah, and the Invader is going to be given, like you said, that amount of mana. Plus, you can kind of push your luck. There's actually a deck of mana cards here that are going to give you a certain amount of mana while also giving your opponent something, usually more time tokens. But if you really need that last mana, you can draw one of these cards.
Each time that he decides to take one of those activations or take some kind of mana to use, that provides me with an hourglass, which I have to use immediately at that time. Where I put these is up to me. Now, one of the unique things about this game is when I'm given an hourglass, I can let it sit there for multiple rounds, basically letting me as the Defender decide when I want to trigger those particular actions. However, once one of these actions are completely filled up, I'm going to trigger that ability and then take whatever token is associated and place it around my board. For instance, this one here is the Skeleton Cauldron, which I can put on one of my various different areas where I can hold one of them on the wall to be able to basically kill your skeletons as they run into them.
Yeah, and in addition, the Invader doesn't get to spend those time tokens, but I can still take my turn to rearrange my spellbook here to prepare for whatever's coming, because you have some more powerful spells. There are 2 other decks of cards that sit off the side that are just more powerful, but the only way to get them out is, of course, to give time tokens to your opponent. I can switch these around. In addition, I have an Altar of Death. As my skeletons die, they go to this altar. I can use, again, time tokens to bring these back from the dead and affect the board in different ways. So once that's done, once the Invader has settled on how they're going to have their tableau look, you have to go from left to right, and you have an option. Either cast the spell, which makes you tap it, you do the effect of the spell, pay the mana, and you give your hourglass to the opponent. And like I said earlier, these are going to bring out more tokens onto the battlefield in different ways, or they're going to bring out siege engines and things like that. And you're going to, over time, populate this board. Or you can just choose to skip one, in which case you just tap it. You don't give the mana, but you can never come back to that card. So the way you rearrange these cards is very important, which is why you might want to spend that time token during that supply phase. And then once I've done casting my spells, I can go out and activate anything that's out here on the player field. So you'll get a number of activations. Again, I can give more time tokens to do that. And then I'm going to get to make maneuvers. Maneuvers is where you're actually going to be moving your cubes across these paths to these different areas in order to stage your assaults. And each one of these areas can have a set number of people in them to prepare for your invasion. And of course, you're going to have to give more time tokens to do this. You can either do a minor movement for 3 time tokens, a major movement for 5, or you could actually do both. But you're giving 8 time tokens to your opponent, which is quite a lot.
Yeah, so again, it's the balance that the invader has to play as well throughout the game. Do they want to give the defender a lot of time tokens in order to prep their defenses as well? Because you have to think of this as a time element. These are 8 hours that the players are playing through the game. Not 8 hours of real time, but 8 hours of game time. And as you play this, the defender is trying to hold out until the 8th hour, until the dawn breaks. And when the dawn breaks, they are able to win the game unless the invader breaches any one of these walls. So that comes into the next phase, which is the assault phase. This is where the actual action within the game is going to happen.
For the invaders, we can assault. Once we actually get up to the top here, you'll notice that there are several different spaces where we can actually gather to invade and launch our assault against the wall.
So all the preparations that the invader takes feeds into the third phase of the game, and that is the assault phase. This is where the main action is going to take place. This is where you're going to determine whether or not the invader is able to breach one of the walls that is trying to be defended by one of the defenders. And in order to do the assault phase, you have to do it in a very specific order. And that's going to have the ranged combat happen first in a multitude of different steps. And then you're going to have the melee combat with a multitude of steps as well. Each of these will have the players shooting things at other players. Basically, any of your different types of towers, like your cannons, or maybe my tower crossbows doing damage to you, and vice versa with all of your ballistas and other types of effects.
Yeah, whenever you place a ballista out as the invader, you're actually going to build a deck specific to that ballista or siege engine. And you're going to do that by drawing 4 mist cards from a deck of mist cards and 2 hits and kind of shuffling them together to make your deck. And each one of these decks is going to sit out there, and you might get lucky and get a hit, but you might not. So with siege engines, it's actually a little bit of randomness, whereas the defender knows exactly how much damage each one of his things is going to do.
And also there's ways for the defender to be able to mess with that siege deck as well by putting malfunction tokens on there or doing other types of nefarious things in order to prevent those damage tokens from coming in. Now, once you're done with all the range combat, which we're kind of glossing over, you get into the actual melee combat. This is where it's just a straight strength battle. Each of the units in the game has a native strength from 3 down to 1. And what you're going to do is you're going to add up all those particular strengths. For instance, I'll show you one of those areas right now. Here, each of my soldiers is worth 2, my archer is worth 1, and then my walls are worth 1 each. You're going to add up the invader strength as well and find that difference. Whatever that difference is, whether it's on the invader's advantage or the defender's advantage, you're going to take that difference damage on that side. So if you were ahead by 3, I have to do 3 damage worth of units from my area. Now, here's the trick. You get to decide what those units are. So he could do 2 and 1, removing those. One of the cool things is that priests and your walls can never be defeated. So those are always native defense that you have in there, but I will have to replenish that wall. And if there's ever a point where he does damage and then one more gets through, you're going to win the game. So I have to keep those defended at all times.
However, something like this situation where you have 5 here is very rare because generally after the ranged attacks, you're going to lose most of your skeletons and things like that. So it takes a lot of strategy as the invader. You really have to kind of draw their attention away while you kind of plan some machinations of sneaking on the side or whatever, because moving these guys around is very difficult. Like Jeremy said at the beginning of the game, the defender only has X number of guys for the game.
Yeah.
So if you can start chipping that down, but you only have 8 rounds to do it. So you really have to decide whether to hold back or to just keep pressing with the attack.
And finally, you're going to go into the cleanup phase after the assault is done. You'll reset some of the board. You'll go into the next round, get some additional activations. And you'll keep doing this until either the invader is able to breach any one of the walls or the defender is able to hold out for 8 rounds. This is a super complex game, and players should know that going into it. If you like asymmetrical games, and this is a highly asymmetrical game, if you like two-player games, if you like a game with a lot of variability and a lot of different ways to approach it, this is something you should definitely consider.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even talk about a lot of what each of these factions can do, because there are just, each one of these spells is unique. You see all these tokens off to the side of the board that are going to affect the battlefield in different ways. And you're going to see combos and almost engine building happening within all of these different siege weapons. So the number of strategies that you can employ is phenomenal. And each strategy is going to be countered by the defense in a different way.
Yeah.
And so you really have to change those strategies as you see your opponent preparing for a certain frame of attack.
And know also that this is the second edition. It was originally released right after the base edition in 2009. However, it is a standalone game, so you don't have to have Stronghold second edition. You can just play this right out of the box. So that is Stronghold Undead from Portal on Kickstarter right now. If you have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Make sure you check out their Kickstarter page, and we will see you guys next time.